Bonjour, vous écoutez Strangers in Space. JR est un connard. Pendant la prochaine heure, nous parlerons de Doctor Who pour que vous n'ayez pas à le faire.
Hi, I'm Matt.
Hi, I'm Ian.
I'm
JR.
Sorry, I buggered it, didn't I? Did everybody else get that in French there, or was that just me imagining things?
That was Matt showing off.
Mais c'était parfait, hein? C'était parfait.
So
J'adorais.
So for those who don't speak French, I just thought I'd do it in French just to make a difference. So
it wasn't your voice, Matt.
C'était bien.
No, well,
C'était vraiment bien.
what I did was I translated the opening plus a bit about JR into French using Chrome, and then I thought, shall I learn this and speak it myself? And I thought, no, I'll just play it over my phone.
But also, you did the version for audio rather than the version for video.
Yeah. It's so funny and weird either way. I'm comfortable with it. Somebody else will find it funny.
Are you certain about that?
Yeah. The fact that all of your faces looked really confused, and then Stephen thought he was genuinely having a stroke and hearing.
Yeah,
I
thought I was imagining it. Yeah.
Obviously, my confused face is the same as my disappointed face.
Dare I say you very Stephen Moffat approach.
Excellent. Which leads us on to the subject of this. One of the subjects of this podcast.
You do know that I'm a retired French teacher, don't you? I mean, that was my job.
So you know what I call JR then.
Let's move on swiftly past that.
So this podcast we're going to be talking about. Let me get this right: the War Games in Colour, the Doctor Who Christmas Special, Gavin and Stacey. Which one of us?
We're not talking about that in this episode.
Okay, so we're talking about the War Games and the Doctor Who Christmas Special in this episode.
This is our Doctor Who review podcast.
Yes, which includes the War Games and the Christmas Special.
Yes.
So let's start with the War Games. Did we all watch the War Games?
Yes.
We're carrying on, are we? We're not doing that again. The beginning, the intros. I missed it completely.
That's your actual intro. It'll be a French intro, then the title music, and then me saying, "I am Matt," and then you guys fluffing up the introduction, your introductions, because you didn't want to prepare. So did we all? So Ian, starting with you, did you watch the War Games?
I did watch the War Games.
What did you think of the War Games?
I really, really liked the colorization. I thought it looked amazing. I didn't mind the edit most of the time. It did slip into sort of trailer mode, which I think the Daleks in colour did as well, where they overlapped loads of voices and cut lots of fast cuts, almost to sort of get through the story. I'd have preferred not to have done that, but that was fine. And I guess we'll talk more. I guess most of the conversation will probably be about the added stuff at the end, of which I was not completely on board. And also I wasn't completely on board with the sound of drums music coming in either. But we can talk in more detail, I guess.
Stephen, do you agree with all of that, or have you got your own views?
Most of it. Well, most of it, actually. I thought it looked fantastic. I really did. They did a brilliant job on that. The edit, they're on a hiding to nothing, aren't they? I mean, they've got a 10-episode story being reduced to an hour and a half, hiding to nothing. I thought they did a pretty good job considering that. I didn't mind the cutting about and the overlaying of one bit of soundtrack on top of another set of pictures. I thought that's quite a clever way of doing things. The little flourishes that Ian talks about, I'd call them little bits of fun, to be honest. The master theme and the pictures of future doctors and the regeneration. I thought that was all just fun. And with these things aren't really made for us, are they? These colorizations are made for youngsters who might get into Doctor Who by watching something shorter and in colour.
I think they're exactly made for us. I think 40-year-old plus Doctor Who fans are the only ones that are tuning into BBC 4 to see how Ben Cook has edited the War Games. I don't think 10 to 15-year-olds are going, oh wow, the War Games are on. But I might be wrong.
Right. You might be right.
What did you think?
I agree with Matt. I think it's for us. I think every time they do one of these things, they pretend it's so that youngsters can get into Doctor Who. The truth is, my 10-year-old will happily sit through all 10 episodes of the War Games You know, he sat through all 7 episodes of the Daleks in one sitting. He doesn't care a damn. He'll watch it. It's slow. He doesn't mind. It's black and white. He doesn't mind. The edits, the colour, it's a new way for us to watch Doctor Who. So I do think it's, generally speaking, for us. And they use it for the kids as some kind of pretense to get the money together to sort of be able to afford to make these things. I'm basically in the same place as Ian and Steve. I think it was the colour's great. The upscale, obviously, is not magnificent, but what can you do? Changing SD to HD, there's not a lot you can do, but it looked about as good as you're ever going to make it look.
Yeah.
And that's where my problem comes in, which I'll come back to because it's more to do with the ending. But yeah, the editing, I found that fine. I think given that they took 4 hours of TV and boiled it down to 90 minutes, I think they managed to tell a coherent story. Some of it was a bit fast in the middle, but I don't think it became incoherent at any point. A lot of the times, those weird edits where you've got overlapping bits of dialogue or pictures that are coming from one place is a way of actually cutting in scenes where there's no decent cut point. So this was brought up in the Daleks. Why did the flashbacks exist in the Daleks? And then it turned out that the flashbacks in the Daleks were there because they wanted to cut in the middle of a scene where there was no cut in the shot, so there was no place to cut. So they had to throw in something else. So the choice they made there was to throw a bit of flashback. Here, what they chose instead, because they got complaints about those flashbacks, they did cutaways. So they did very brief cutaways in order to jump in the middle of a scene where there was no real jump point. So that all made sense for me, I think. The problem I had with it was the extra stuff they put in at the end. And I don't have a problem with them putting extra stuff in at the end. I didn't really mind that we got to see John Pertwee in the regeneration. But I just think it was sort of aesthetically incoherent with the rest of the story. So you go from upscaled SD to sort of sharp as fuck HD. It's like, no, you're taken right out of the story as soon as that happens. Every time they went to that special effect as well, where you go over to the dome and you get to see it from above, or there was a shot of the house from the outside that they'd brought in from elsewhere too that was in HD as well. Every time you go to one of those, I'm just taken out of the story because they filmed it in HD rather than filming it in SD and upscaling it along with the rest of the story. And then you get the
I thought the same.
Yeah.
So there was a little bit too much of these views of the dome, I thought, to be honest. It's
that might be an editing ploy as well. This kind of re-establishing shot.
Of course.
I thought they almost got it. So obviously the party line is the colorization was great because you can't get, well, a lot of fans or another group of fans basically worked an entire year painstakingly. It's a labor of love. I thought the first half, the edit sort of worked. I thought it slipped into incoherence during the base scenes, but I actually thought it exposed issues with the original script, which it is, escape capture, which over the course of 10 episodes, kind of that sort of works when you're watching it once a week, or you're not watching it so intensively, but when you're editing it, it's boiled down the flaws in the script so at times I'm pretty sure that they've escaped before they got captured, or one character seemed to be captured and then he was free, and there were
it was like, I think, like we said in our group chat, it was a bit like a French farce with doors opening and closing at one point, which it didn't seem like that when you're watching it over 10 episodes. But again, what could they do?
But it was only 10 episodes for necessity. They didn't want it to be 10 episodes. Terence and Malcolm Holt didn't want to do a 10 episode story, but other stories fell through, and Brian Sherwin kept coming back to him saying, "Can you do more? Can you do more? Can you do more?" And Terence himself, I knew Terence slightly. Terence said that it was massively repetitive and massively escape recapture, and it was too long.
But the challenge of editing it is you can't just cut a lot of that stuff out. The editing process was a condensation process rather than a skipping process. And I don't curse the name of Ben Cook. I think it was the wrong story to choose for an edit, but at the same time, it's exactly an obvious story to choose because it's the final Troughton. It's perfect for colorization. It's got loads of location footage, and this is the only way it's really going to be broadcast on television is by editing it down.
Going back to our earlier point of who is this for, I do agree. I think this is for Doctor Who fans primarily, and I think especially ones that are slightly younger than us, as in the ones that came into it in 2005, that have migrated into Classic Who. That a lot of those still find it hard to watch black and white. People, somebody in their 20s the other day said, "I can't watch black and white," and he's 27. He can't watch black and white of anything.
There's a big difference between a 7-year-old and a 27-year-old. A 7-year-old will, a 27-year-old won't.
That's exactly right. Exactly.
But my son, who obviously is exposed to Doctor Who through me, who's 9, he has watched lots of clips on YouTube. That's how he likes watching Doctor Who. So he's watched all the stories in clip form, bits from them, and he's watched, and he's fascinated by the end of the War Games. He knows it off by heart. So he has watched this, and he was bored of it in the same way as he was of the black and white version, in that his attention wasn't really there until the last 10 minutes when he locked into it, the bit that he's already seen loads and loads of times, and he quite liked it. All the little weird Easter eggs, which I didn't. I was grumbling next to him, but so it does work on a modern audience. Only if that modern audience is like your child or my child has been exposed to Doctor Who from an early age, which is quite unusual these days.
I was surprised to hear from one of the people who had been involved in making it, I can't remember who it was, on another podcast emanating from Canada, that if I remember rightly, that they actually actively wanted to do a longer story, and there was a suggestion that maybe next time they'll do a 4-parter and they don't have to cut that down so much. And the idea was, and the idea came because, oh no, that's much less interesting because we've got much less freedom to chop stuff out in that instance.
I guess
also reported that wrong. Also, they had to really. I can't remember where I got this information, but Scott Burditt's in our group chat in Manchester. It might have been through him, but either way, they were basically do the War Games. It's got to be 60 minutes again, and they really, really pushed and said it can't be 60 minutes, and they just about got 90 out of them. Because it was 3 seconds. 3 seconds takes. I can't remember. 3 seconds takes a huge amount of time, which meant 4 people working on it could just about do 90 minutes in a year. It's just incredible.
They need to do the Dominators next. There's lots of outdoors. There's lots of outdoors. There's Zoe and Jamie, and it's a story that really could do with being a lot shorter than it is.
They'll do another
probably, yeah.
So what I did like it, but it also made me realise how much location footage there was in this, and how actually similar it is. There's a much smaller gap between this and the season 7 stories than I thought. It feels very much like Doctor Who kind of moves into the future without you even realising, and suddenly you're watching.
Well, I'm writing a book that I can't talk about the invasion at the moment, which has not been announced yet. Though I think it's not been announced by mistake. But anyway, and it's really striking me all the time that this is a season 7 story in prototype, and the invasion, which was earlier the same season, wasn't it? It's a unit story. It's the same.
And I didn't mind the extras. I didn't mind. I know people did mind this bit, but the choosing the next face bit, as we were running up to it, I was wondering how they were going to get around the rubbish line drawings, and it was sort of fine. And I suspect this is going to be one of our debates about the Christmas special as well, about scenes which may be there just for cute moments of fun, and scenes that are there with kind of weight to them. And I think for some of us, the extra scenes in the War Games maybe had more weight than was intended in them, and maybe including, I mean, I half expected them to drag the War Chief off in a sort of a glow of regenerating energy, but they sort of restrained themselves from doing that.
On a sort of similar point, the Cyberman music from Space and Time, whatever it was called in the old days, that was also used for the Yeti.
Yeah.
So here you've got the master music also used for the War Chief. That doesn't necessarily have to signal that he's the master. It could just be that that's a piece of music.
There's a difference, though, isn't there?
I don't really mind.
It's a bit of fun.
I don't really mind the master War Chief thing, because he doesn't say for definite that he is. It's just using that music. I thought it was a bit overused.
I think it is a bit different.
It's
different, though, JR. Sure. It's different because the space adventure music, that was a piece of stock music, and I'm absolutely certain that when they used it with the Yeti, they didn't realize either didn't realize they'd already used it with the Cybermen, or didn't realize that it had become established in the mind of a viewer.
Oh, but Steve,
seen those stories once each, that it was Cybermen.
No, but Steve, what I'm saying is,
yeah,
you can now in your mind reconfigure that music to, instead of standing for the master, just to stand for evil Time Lord.
Of course you can. Of course.
I did have an issue with the music in general, because what Ian was talking about, the sort of the feeling of it being a trailer, it's odd. So it's a similar thing with animations. Some animations feel like computer games. So I tried watching the Celestial Toymaker and struggled with it because it felt like a computer game. And there's a line beyond which at some point it will stop feeling like a computer game, but it feels like a computer game. And it's the same thing with these edits and trailers, like Ian was saying. There's a point where it just feels like this is coming up next week on Doctor Who clips. And I think the music reinforces that, because the music plays over all of this dialogue that you're kind of used to not having so much music over. And it's just, so the modern approach to Doctor Who music, which is constant kind of in the background driving things on, doesn't quite work with the dialogue that they're presenting. So it feels like they're trying to force it into a different shape, which they are.
Sure. Yes. And that actually is because it's faster as well that they do that, because in the old days you'd have scenes that went on for several minutes at a time, often with people just talking to each other, and you wouldn't have music there because you didn't need it. Now those scenes are boiled down to like 30 seconds, and you kind of need the music for the transitions. And because the scenes themselves are so short, you don't get transition music between the scenes. The transition music just carries on into the scene and then transitions out at the other side and into the next scene after that.
Yeah.
So the music.
So I think my position is I celebrate everyone involved with this, because I think everybody did a really successful job in something that was essentially impossible, which is making something feel modern out of nothing. Like, they're not. So Dylan of this parish was saying, if they brought in a professional editor or a professional writer, they could have done something better. I don't think that's true. I think this is a very, very particular skill, to take all of this old footage, condense it down into a way that feels coherent and modern. I don't think anybody could do that. So you might as well have Ben Cook, having fun with it.
Well, it might have been. Sorry, Joe.
Well, I was only going to say, besides, if you've got somebody who was a professional but wasn't necessarily inured in Doctor Who, they might miss a lot of things. Although, to be fair, there are some things that are missing anyway. Matt, your favourite ever line reader?
Yeah, they might have included, "No, what a stupid person you are," or "a stupid fool you are," which is my favourite line in the whole thing, that somehow got cut out, and I have no idea why. So, as this is the sort of the secondary thing we're doing in this podcast, should we score the war games?
We're going to score them both, yes, and then we'll move on, because we were supposed to spend 10 minutes on this, and we've been nearly half an hour.
Yeah. Stephen, starting with you, how would you score the edited version of the war games?
Do you know, I hate doing scores for these things, but in the spirit of these things, no, in the spirit of these things, I will do so. What we're scoring out of 5?
10.
Out of 10.
Oh, out of 10. Yeah, well, I'm going to go with 8 then, because I really enjoyed it.
Okay, and just for the record, we're doing the same thing with the Christmas special later, just so to prepare you for that.
Oh, right. I'll prepare for the show.
So, Ian, war game score?
I love scoring out of 10 compared to 5, because it's easier to sit on the fence a bit. I think I would have loved it more if they hadn't had the stupid Future Doctors bit at the end, which I did. That was just too much fun. So I'm going to give it 7.
Okay, JR.
I think the stupid Future Doctors bit at the end was fine. And I'm giving it an 8 for all the same reasons as like Steve said. It's one of my favourite stories. It is not the best version of that story, but it was a lot of fun.
Do you think they had an edit with Colin Baker as one of the Future Doctors? And then went, no, we can't do that.
Yeah. I'm going to.
Well, there is that line, isn't there?
I'm going to give it a 7. But actually not a reflection of anybody who worked on it. It's just, I think it was an impossible task, but it worked out fine for me.
Are you assuming the people who worked on it are going to be listening to this podcast, Matt? Because you keep talking about them.
No, but after it was on,
they are Doctor Who fans.
Yeah, my social media was filled with vitriol blaming one person or another, including our WhatsApp threads.
Oh, really?
So yeah, and I don't think anybody got anything wrong, and I think that's actually an important distinction when you're reviewing something. It's actually, for once, it's actually not the end product, but the task that's actually impossible, rather than anybody doing anything wrong with it.
Yeah. This will come into our general thing. It's creative choices, and they've worked their asses off, and there were creative choices that I might have gone, if I was in the room, which I wasn't, might have gone, oh, do we need? I think maybe they did too much with the cutaway, with the cutaways with the dome, and then the fun at the end. They could have just been a bit, let's not bother with that because it's fine. Just get some pictures of, but they went down a certain route, and
talking beyond their choice. The real heroes of this are the guys who colorized it.
Oh yeah, totally.
Astonishing. The creative choices. I do not for 1 second think Ben Cook asked anybody, should I do this or should I do that? I think those choices were 100% his, and he just handed it over to the other guys to colorize or whatever. I don't think there was any discussion about those choices. And if you don't like, and even if there had been a discussion, I think he would have just said, no, well, I'm doing it.
And I liked the Pertwee stuff, although I take your point that maybe it would have been even more fun if they'd made it look the same as the as the footage. But again, they were doing a clip in a year. They maybe weren't even talking to each other.
Talking about creative choices, let's talk about the Doctor Who Christmas special.
Yes.
So this is Stephen Moffat's 9th Christmas special. It's his big return to the festive season after a break of 3 Chibnalls and an RTD and a Partridge to Petrie. So this is joy to the world. I was surprised at how divisive this was. I was watching it thinking, wow, this is great. This is fun. This is this is actually feeling festive. This doesn't have Daleks in it. This actually isn't set in a warehouse. This doesn't feel like it was filmed under COVID restrictions. This feels like it's, Doctor Who having fun again. And then I made the mistake of going online afterwards and then finding out actually this is divisive and it's a Stephen Moffat script. So that's always divisive. So the first question is usually, when did we first see this? So Stephen, did you watch this on broadcast? Or
yes, of course I did.
Okay, so in a sentence, what do you feel about it? And then we'll get back into the nitty gritty.
I really enjoyed it. Yeah, I thought it was a lot of fun. I'm surprised that you saw all these negative things, because I must say that the reaction online I've seen has been overwhelmingly positive, apart from on the Strangers in Space WhatsApp feed where some people were.
Maybe I count that as well. Yeah, I saw some of those comments on social media before they ended up. They sort of washed on the shores of our WhatsApp feed after being exposed on social media.
Anyway, I saw one other person, a North American publisher, a man of very large self-aggrandizement, I guess, saying, I am done with Doctor Who now, and talking about the fact that it ended with a suicide, and entirely failing to recognise that Death to the Daleks and Image of the Fendal and I don't know, the Dalek, right?
The suicide thing I've seen a lot of all over threads and Blue Sky.
I mean, there's a surprising amount in this that I I don't think I saw. Either I don't think I saw when I was watching it and I missed, or just possibly people are imposing things on it that weren't really there to start with. So on that note, Ian, what did you think of the Christmas special?
I've watched it 1.5 times because I watched it once, and I didn't watch it at 5:10 because that's just too early. So I watched it about 7:00 when everything was quiet, and me and my son went and watched it, and we really enjoyed it. So I've got issues with it, but we really enjoyed it, and my son really was swept along and loved it. And then after we were chatting on WhatsApp, and I was like, oh my God, everyone thinks I'm an asshole for daring to have issues with this. So I went and rewatched it. I went, no, I still have those reads of those lines, which we'll talk about in a minute. But generally, I liked it. I thought it was a little bit of a ChatGPT write a Doctor Who episode in the style of Stephen Moffat. There was a bit too much. I think Moffat's charming. His retread of his own material. I'm more allergic to it than a lot of other people. I was allergic to it during, what's it bloody called? The thing where he walks around the castle.
Heaven Sent.
Heaven Sent. I was allergic to it in Heaven Sent because he ripped off pattern buffer stuff from Star Trek in the library, and then he's reusing it in just stuff like that bothers me. And this stuff like that got in the way of me enjoying it as much as I should have done.
I mean, that's why.
And I wasn't happy with the end, and some of the COVID stuff was just interesting to pull apart. And the fact is, I got real abuse online for even suggesting it. Like, people were just like, fucking idiots doing this, and I came again. I had this read, and I watched it again, and I still had this read. And those awful people in their wine fridges and their dancing and their parties, and I listened to them. Brilliant.
Maybe we should get down into these reads a bit. You're doing the entire review in your first 2 minutes.
Okay, well, I'm just saying.
It's fine.
I let my mother die alone. That's joining two dots and not getting to a different place.
Ian, yeah. How do you feel about the Hinchcliffe era, where every single week Robert Holmes goes back to yet another Hammer film and has Sarah Jane possessed by yet another alien monster in disguise as yet another human myth?
Well, it's a little bit samey. It's probably the worst thing about the Hinchcliffe era, but at least it's a different film every time. But yeah, the possession stuff gets a bit samey.
This is why having Ian on this podcast, I think, was a really good thing, because he's got a different view, and it's great to hear different views even when they're wrong. JR, what did you think? What did you think about the Christmas special?
I watched it.
I don't actually know what you thought, because you got this you got this list of like criticism about the Christmas special on WhatsApp, which I wasn't started by me. I just occasionally joined in. And you hadn't seen it, and you said in a plaintive voice, "I'm watching this later, and I've got a migraine."
And I didn't realise you hadn't seen it.
Everybody then sort of
at the end of that thread.
Everybody sort of went quiet for a minute, and then somebody else went. And another thing I don't like. So I don't know what you think about. What do you think in a sentence? Like Ian, in a sentence.
In between the broadcast and watching it, I got about 60 notifications with spoilers.
Yeah.
So I basically knew exactly what the last 15... I watched it at 10 o'clock on Christmas Day. So after everybody had gone to bed, when I had a bit of peace and quiet, and I enjoyed it. I didn't think it was the best thing ever. I watched it again on the following night. I think I watched it 2 nights in a row, actually, because I thought, seeing as we're not doing the podcast straight away, I've got an opportunity to watch it a second time, so I will. And on the second go, I enjoyed it so much more.
Okay, well, that's excellent. So I'm feeling like I'm probably the anti-Ian in this podcast, which isn't a bad thing, because I watched
liked it.
This is the first time I've watched a Doctor Who Christmas special and immediately liked it. And I don't know whether it was the mood I was in, or I wasn't surrounded by family this time. I was just watching it for myself, and I kind of liked everything about it, and I don't think it was a ChatGPT Stephen Moffat script, I think it was such a well constructed story, because it had lots of, thanks Dax, it had lots of moments where you think he's just doing this to be cute, or there's this cute moment, or he's introducing characters who won't come back, and they all tie together at the end in a sort of, you know, Heath Robinson sort of kind of way of pulling a door off.
There's a line, Italian job thing. There's a line, isn't there, about 5 minutes in, where it's just a throwaway line, and he says, "Oh, it's the Time Hotel, when you can get to everywhere all at once, every Christmas, everywhere all at once." No room. No wonder there was no room at the inn. And you just think, oh, that's really funny. And then when you watch it for the second time, you're going, oh no, Moffat's telling us something there. And actually, the second time you watch it, for that first half an hour, you are watching Stephen Moffat set up one thing after another, that by the end of the story, every single one of those things pays off. It's astonishing.
But also he gives sort of red herrings as well, because Nicola Coughlan is set up as the companion for this episode, and then she sort of disappears, and then another person set up and disappears, and then a minor character comes in and forms the backbone of the center of this story, which when the Power of Three Chibnall did a similar thing with the Power of Three, and I really didn't get on board with that. I was quite bored with that. But with Stephen Moffat's dialogue, suddenly this whole era made sense to me. But we can talk about the contentious.
Just in Ian's thing about the COVID, and I absolutely respect the experience you went through there and your family went through. But I think maybe that is part of the reason why you feel that way. I mean, without denying the power and the importance of that. I mean, my dad didn't die during COVID. He died right on the eve of COVID, and as a result of that, his funeral, which should have been a massive celebratory affair, was 4 people in a dark room. So, you know, we get affected by these things, but it didn't bother me. It didn't worry me. That I thought that was a good comment about the COVID law makers and breakers.
Yeah, no, I approve of that side of it. But what the reading of, and I'm not saying this ruined me. I'm not like one of the people on the internet going this is the worst thing Stephen Moffat's ever done. I'm just saying the reading of it, that and they're dancing in their parties, and I listen to them. But then it jumps to, and I let my mother die alone, and that suggests she shouldn't have.
I didn't read that.
I didn't. But she should have let her mother die alone. Just like funerals had to have 4 people at them. Just like I didn't have the last Christmas with my dad. And I didn't like that jump.
I don't
that jump. Maybe it's because there's too many people out there retrospectively saying.
The impression, so the COVID stuff, because another member of the Strangers in Space, the occasional Strangers in Space group, had a legitimate problem with the COVID stuff, because it is, to use the modern word, triggering for some. But we all live with our own personal experience of COVID. Mine was a fairly soft experience. I see it as a national trauma, and I quite like seeing COVID. So I watched it here and felt actually quite emotional seeing it referenced in this, because for me it's a past event that we're sort of recovering from. But obviously we all live with our own sort of trigger. The view I took is she thinks that she feels guilt for letting her mum die alone, and she puts it like that. But the point of the story is,
she never quite gets corrected on that,
because you're looking at it retrospectively. She's looking back to something that happened 4 years ago, and she's speaking in a way that suggests that she wished she'd been able to do it a different way. But she knows that she wasn't able to do it a different way, and her anger is to the people who did do it a different way, despite the fact that they were the people who made the rules for everybody else. So it's not Stephen Moffat. It's not Stephen Moffat saying, "I'm going to write this story to change the rules." It's Stephen Moffat saying, "I'm going to write this story, which is a commentary on the people who changed the rules for themselves, and the people who didn't change the rules, and the people who had to abide by the rules." And it's about the anger. It's not about the rules.
Yeah. No, I get that. I'm just because I've been slightly abused online. It's almost like, well, I'm just
only by me.
Quiet about this then. No. By people I don't know, I dared to even say, because they were really going. Some fucking idiots are saying this. Oh, can you? I was like, well, there's a slight reading of this, and it's just a slight reading. And you know what? and I've watched it twice now, and it just has that slight made me arch my eyebrow and go, that's a little bit. That's a little bit lockdown denial. Yeah, that's important. But it's a minor part. It's a minor part of the play, and I didn't using COVID itself. I didn't mind that they used COVID. I thought it was good.
There's going to be a lot of COVID references because we're now effectively in the sort of 1945 to 1950 period of talking about World War II. Yeah. And at some point, we're all going to be, at some point, some of the country will be, wasn't it nice during COVID lockdown when we all drew together, remember the Queen's speech for COVID lockdown? Yeah. And there'll be others in the country that actually say, well, hang on, actually, COVID was a nightmare and I was trapped in a London flat.
Yeah, or I was a nurse for some reason. Yeah, or I was a nurse for some reason. They did not show as that on the news every night. And maybe if they had done, thousands of less people would have died.
Yeah. Maybe a lot of that.
Just the lockdown still wasn't important to people.
A lot of the reaction is whether, like me, you were lucky enough to be living out in the country where we were relatively not affected, apart from, as I say, the thing about my dad's funeral, and people who were living in the cities who were massively affected. I mean, to have been stuck in a 6th floor flat in the middle of a city must have been horrendous. Which is why they were all flocking out here to enjoy our countryside when they shouldn't have been. And I couldn't find it in me to blame them for doing that.
So that's the minor central bit of the story. Let's talk about the rest of the episode. But let's cover the other contentious thing that I understood to be contentious was the Jesus thing at the end.
Can I ask a question here?
Sorry, JR wants to ask a question.
Because I want to ask this question as a prologue to what we're about to talk about. Okay. I remember, I swear, I'm going to now find out if anybody else remembers that on a RTD leaving interview recorded in either late 2009 or early 2010, which was in Doctor Who magazine just after the end of time, or maybe just before the end of time, but Russell T Davies basically summing up his last 5 years. I swear he said, they said to him, what's the one thing you wish you'd done and you hadn't? And I swear one of the things he brought up was, I wish I'd actually used one of the Christmas specials to go back to the actual nativity.
I mean, it seems an obvious thing. So it seems an obvious thing to do, but it's a bit like Hitler. It seems to have been through the history of Doctor Who, one of these things that production teams have always sort of considered and then immediately vetoed as being, too soon or too delicate.
But it wasn't offensive. Look, I'm not a Christian, but to me, I couldn't see how that could possibly be offensive, because it wasn't saying anything about what Christians believe about what went on in those days. All it was saying was that the star in the sky was something was an astronomical phenomenon, which I think we know it was. The
great thing for me was it turned out, I think, to be offensive to hardcore Christians and hardcore atheists. Hardcore atheists because it presented something that they don't think happened, even though it did happen historically. And hardcore Christians because it presented something that did happen, but in a way that kind of Eric Van Daniken did into some sort of reality.
This hardcore atheist wasn't bothered by it at all.
Yeah, and I'm a hardcore atheist.
The story isn't any other story.
I'm a hardcore
Same as the Robin Hood one.
I'm a fuzzy agnostic.
Yeah, I'm a hardcore atheist, but my problem with it wasn't. I wasn't massively offended by it. It's a bit of fun, and I just found it a bit of fun too far. In that, I know it's Doctor Who and it's fantasy, but it's like it's supposed to be on the side of history and science, and so going to a period of history when we know it wasn't the year zero and saying it was the year zero, it's just a bit shit to me. I just find it a bit shit. We know it wasn't the year zero. We know, I think it was about the 4th century when we first started doing this calendar, and they got their sums wrong, and they don't know any of it. So for the Doctor, for me, I would have been fine. I would have been fine if they were going back.
Ian, this took place before they started counting that way. And so this story was not affected by the mistake in the counting.
Yeah, but he said it, but we were using our calendar for all the years. So when they go back to the year 0, and they say it's the year 0,
no.
And it wasn't the year 0. It was 4 BCE.
Nobody in the year 0. Nobody in the year 0 was saying, "Oh, here we are in the year 0."
I know, but we are getting our information from the screen for the Doctor Who universe, and they say it's 2024. And then we say it's 0. I would have preferred a unit dating thing.
I would say
going back to the War Games.
I would say
0, 4 BCE.
I would say two things. First of all, Doctor Who isn't on the side of history and science any more than any television and film. Doctor Who does with history and science exactly what JFK does with history, Oliver Stone does with history, exactly what any film does with history, and fudges it so it becomes understandable immediately on screen. So it uses shortcuts. The dating of the Jesus scene, there's no way they were going to think about alternate calendars.
I know. Just put the word Bethlehem.
They've done it before, though, haven't they? They've done it before. They've gone into this sort of pseudo-religious thing with the Impossible Planet and the Satan Pit, for example, where you effectively have the devil there, and I didn't like that at the time because I felt that the Doctor universe should be something that could be understood and explained, even if it isn't.
Saying the devil's an alien is, the devil's an alien is.
I think they were doing. I don't think they were in that, though. They were saying it was something from before the universe, weren't they?
Doctor Who is never anti-religion. I don't think, unless you're. I mean, one thing I liked about it. So,
hang on, then. Before we move on, there is one subtext that is so hardwired into this story that is extremely anti-religious, and we can't just ignore it and move on. And by the way, this is not a story about Christianity, it's a story about Christmas. So when the Doctor says about the joy at the end, he's not talking about Christianity's bringing joy into the world. He's talking about the joy you get at Christmas time, because this is a Christmas special. Yeah. But it's kind of the point of the Nativity that God sends a star to show the wise men the way to the Son of God. Only the thing is, that's because the wise men have told themselves that God is sending them a star to follow to the Son of God. Yeah. And when a star shows up in the sky, entirely by coincidence, with a scientific explanation in Doctor Who, the wise men follow the star to the thing that they've told themselves they believe to be the Son of God. And so, entirely by coincidence, this baby is born. And I could be wrong here, but in the Bible, it's only the book itself that says the Virgin Mary is a virgin. She doesn't go around telling everybody she's a virgin.
Hey, guess what I am, lads? Guess what?
I mean, the agnostic in me would point out that if there is a God, then he would engineer the events in the episode to get a star to Bethlehem for the wise men to follow. So that's exactly the sort of thing.
Sutek's hiring graphic designers. Yahweh is hiring Villengard to star.
Did he just say? I think he just said Yahweh. I think we're supposed to stone him now, aren't we, or something? Look, we've dug ourselves another. Look, we're going down another pointless pit here, aren't we?
That's the Jesus
we just
bit.
spent ages.
What I'd like to say is, I like talking about this stuff, but in terms of my enjoyment of the episode, it did affect me just on not because of all that, historical religious theology stuff, but just because after we brought in COVID and made me slightly moved, if not slightly from my eyebrow, he then had such a glib ending. It made me go, this is a bit silly. So on a basic level, it did.
But then that's happened before, though, wasn't it? Voyage of the Damned was a very similar glib ending, wasn't it? Where Kylie disappears in a puff of gold, and he waves Mr. Copper off on Earth. I mean,
this is one of the
Christmas special.
This is one of the reasons why I really enjoy Stephen Moffat Christmas specials, and I enjoy this Christmas special.
Yeah.
Compared to Russell T Davies, seemed to make Christmas specials that reflected his own childhood at Christmas, which is legitimate, but his own childhood tended to be more commercial or more sort of, I watched this film in the 1970s.
Yeah.
Whereas Chris Chibnall's Christmas must have been very depressing when he was a kid, because his specials, even though they're not, as Dylan very rightly pointed out on the WhatsApp thread, he was writing New Year's Day specials, not Christmas specials. But his specials
is still part of the Christmas period.
Yeah, his specials always felt like they were slightly grimmer than the Stephen Moffat ones. Whereas Stephen Moffat seems to get that balance between not religion, but the kind of the spiritual aspect of Christmas, the family aspect, the kind of emotional aspect.
And he's gone all the way here, hasn't he?
The morality of Christmas. And this comes, all of these things are sort of brought together to create this story.
His tone is very Disney. It's, and I don't mean that necessarily as a really bad thing. I just mean his tone is. There's a reason he's written for Hollywood and stuff. This is big, brash American.
I don't think this was a Hallmark Christmas. I think Russell T Davies does Hallmark Christmas specials with actual families coming together. I think Stephen Moffat does more fantasy riffs on traditional English Christmas.
I prefer Chibnall's three. I genuinely prefer Chibnall's, I think.
But it's kind of the point of this. But it's kind of the point of this story is that, and this is the reason why it had to end up where it did, is because this is a story about the birth of the idea of Christmas. That's what this story is about. So he's telling a story. So the reason this episode exists is because Stephen Moffat wanted to tell a story about being alone at Christmas. Yeah. And so he tells a story about a character who goes off at Christmas to be alone. And he says, right, why would a character go off at Christmas to be alone? Because of the guilt they feel about the fact that 4 years ago their mother died alone at Christmas.
Yeah, I love that. That's all good.
and so you move on from there. So who else would be alone at Christmas? Somebody who's the only caretaker at a quiet hotel that only has a couple of guests at Christmas time. They're going to be alone at Christmas too. Chris Chibnall did the same story in Eve of the Daleks, basically, didn't he? It's not a hotel, it's a warehouse thing, but whatever. Same sort of thing. Who else would be alone at Christmas? All these other characters are alone at Christmas. And why is Stephen Moffat telling a story about a character's being alone at Christmas? Because, once again, the Doctor is alone at Christmas, because we've just come out of a series where the Doctor's companion is left in the last episode. So the entire thing fits together in this giant coherent bow of this story about characters who are alone at Christmas and who end up helping one another out. And where does all this come from? It comes from the fact that it is Christmas, and so Moffat, in a little stroke of genius, turns the story about these people feeling alone because it's Christmas into a story about the people who actually accidentally ended up inventing Christmas. It's wonderful.
It's better than the church on Ruby Road. Can we all agree that it doesn't have any scenes set in the living room of the house for 5 minutes at a time?
Hotel.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ian, you were going to.
The hotel, it was great.
You're going to do.
I'm just going to say, except I did genuinely like the setup and most of the structure. I didn't quite get that we had Joy, who's got her problems, and then we had woman in caretaker. I didn't quite buy that the Doctor would go, this will do for a year, this will do, and didn't go. I would have maybe set it in a different year, so we weren't going, we'll go and see Ruby then, go and have an adventure, go and find David Tennant and use his fucking TARDIS.
But there's a reason why he doesn't go and see Ruby, because there's that kind of, there's that again red herring where Ruby gets a phone call and it's not from the Doctor. So there's a reason why the Doctor's not going back to Ruby, which I don't know whether we know or not.
There's a crossing of my own time streams thing going on.
He's been very respectful in giving us space, isn't he?
So there might be an emotional reason, but that's kind of consistent with that twist at the end that he chooses. I don't know. I just like that. I like that sequence. Should we talk about the? So that's the weeds.
But and also at the other end of that is because he's got to stay there because he needs to find out what the code is, and he does that brilliant thing. They did it in Gavin and Stacey as well. At the end of Gavin and Stacey, there's this scene where they get. No, at the end of Gavin and Stacey, there's this scene where they chase down the motorway to try and catch somebody up, and when they get there, they say, "Oh Jesus, why don't we just phone him?"
Yes.
This does exactly the same thing. It has the doctor staying in a hotel room for a year because basically that's what he's told himself to do, so that he can find out what the number is, only to realise at the end of that year, I already know what the number is because he said it when he came into the room.
It's just like Gavin and Stacey, but it has the advantage that it's not written by James Corden. So I think we can all agree that there's a big relief.
I think I'd have liked that bootstrap bit if it hadn't been done so many times before by Moffat, and if the curse of fatal death wasn't like becoming more and more what his Doctor Who is.
But Ian, the point is not that he's done it before, but what he uses it for. So it's what he uses it to say. And what he uses it to say here is, if you tell the Doctor he's got to stay in this place with this woman who's alone and he's alone, then they will help each other out. And so the important bit is not the bootstrap. The bootstrap is just an excuse to have a snazzy bit of dialogue.
Yeah. And I think I would have been all right with it if I didn't quite get what the Anita's big deal was. She seemed perfectly all right, so I didn't quite get.
I mean, that was the advantage of us. The advantage of him staying there is that we got another brilliant potential companion, didn't we? I mean, Steph DeWally as Anita was absolutely fine.
But she didn't. I don't think she did. Yeah. I don't think she was fine. I think so. She was very grumpy in this hotel, and initially she seems to be a Moffat minor character, almost an extra in the background, that's making a joke about how grumpy people working in like these small hotels are at Christmas and how they don't really want to be there. So she was a joke character, and then she turned out through the middle of the episode to become actually more and more important, and it turned out to be her character that slowly gets exposed throughout that story.
Did anybody watch Unleashed? Because I didn't watch Unleashed, so I'm assuming they dealt with this Unleashed.
Given up watching Unleashed.
I don't watch it anyway. But she was a joke character who was there with a handful of lines, and they realised that the actor was so good, and that the character basically said something about the rest of the characters in it, that they expanded her piece, and that whole year in the hotel room was an addition to the story at the end. That wasn't originally going to have happened. Not in that way. So he added that bit with the bootstrap and the the 4-digit code in order to give us a year with that character who had her part expanded beyond just being the receptionist at the hotel.
She was absolutely terrific, and but so was
she was.
I mean,
well, let's talk about performances now. We've covered the contentious bits. So the performances conversation is normally the one of the less interesting bits of the review of the podcast, because none of us are really actors. But let's talk about performances. What do we think?
We're all viewers.
We're all viewers.
We're all the people who are supposed to be taking in these performances and enjoying them.
Should we start with Joel Fry?
Terrific.
Yeah, I like Joel Fry. I've heard him get some shade on podcasts I've been listening to reviewing this.
He's great.
I think he's brilliant. Yeah. Our friends in Australia did not like him, but then maybe they don't know if they know who he is.
You might say friends.
But I thought I've always I loved him in everything he does, and I've always sort of gone, could he be a doctor? But he's I thought he was good.
He sounded very like David. I agree that he sounded like David Walliams. I saw a comment afterwards, and actually, as I was watching it, there's a sort of a David Walliams Little Britain character who was sort of mimicking. But I thought it was great. And Nicola
David Walliams, but less annoying, right?
Well, David Walliams, but not David Walliams, so less of a sex.
Yeah, so by force, less annoying. Yeah.
Nicola Coughlan was really good as well, but mainly because you go into this story thinking she's going to be one thing, and actually she gets a range of different things to do. She gets the Sarah Jane Smith possession moments, but also she fights it, and she gets the Sarah Jane Smith in the air vent in Ark in Space moment, and so all of those things.
She did it a lot less, isn't she, than you think?
Yeah.
Yeah,
she's an actor with an awful lot of charm, and there's a twinkle there that she makes you want to watch her. But the character was not really much at all. Yes, the character was she's sad and guilty, and she wasn't given a lot to work with, to be honest.
She gets that angry bit at the end, and that was the important.
And she was a little bit of a cipher.
Because I think
I do think
the story he's telling, he needs a character who's going to be in it, who's capable of doing a big bit like that at the end in order to explain what she's doing there. But for the rest of the story, basically needs to be somebody who's being possessed by the sort of basically the bad guy of the story. So he needed somebody who was good enough to pull on what the character needed to do at the end, to pull off what the character needed to do at the end. But also, so for me, she was a little bit like Kylie Minogue. When Kylie Minogue was in Voyage of the Damned, everyone was thinking she's going to be this massive, major part of the story. And she's a fairly big part of the story, but not nearly as starry a part of the story. Irony.
She's a bit like Kylie Minogue, but an actress.
Well, but you know what I mean? You think she's going to be the big thing going in, but actually, while she gets a couple of important bits to do, a lot of the time it's the other characters are just as important as she is.
I think what you said before about, and this is going back to structure a bit, but what you said before about how the Anita character was given a bigger role after they saw how good she was, that makes me realise that is what was niggling me. It's kind of unbalanced because it's supposed to be joy, and she gets, for whatever reason, she's slightly sidelined, and it's still all about her. And then Anita's big, but not actually doing that much. So that's
one of the things I really liked.
So that's that slightly unbalanced feeling.
So but with Trev as well, it's kind of
I really like the fact that it went in a different direction, so it surprised me. Because I was worried.
Another draft might have managed to put the two characters together.
Or watch it for a second time in full rather than just bits. Because if you watch it for a second time in full, it becomes like a pass the parcel Christmas special, where it starts with Joy, then goes to Trev, then goes to Anita, then comes back to Joy.
Yeah,
have the big.
It's got that monkey's paw element.
And at the end, if you watch the whole thing through for the second time, the bit at the end when you get all the characters come through to explain what they're doing as part of the Star, when they all show up on this sort of holograms thing one after the other, that bit becomes really quite moving when you watch it. I think especially for the second time, because by that time it's like you've had three potential companions, and all of them there at the end are basically dead, but they're doing something to make the universe a better place. And it just becomes this really moving moment at the end where 3 times over that happens, basically.
Anita's not dead at the end, though, is she? And Anita's not dead at the end.
No, I'm thinking of Jonathan Harris.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay,
yeah. Here's the thing, he never defeats Villengard, does he? Or does he?
No, he does.
Does their star go off in the wrong place?
The star goes off at the wrong place, so they can't access it. That is made quite clear at the end of the story.
Right, yeah.
So should we? Is there anything else we want to cover with this, or should we score it?
With performances,
yes.
Something about Ncuti Gatwa occasionally really did make me go shouting in front of green screen. The Marvel MCU kind of feel of it. I was a little bit tired.
I thought he was a lot better here though than he was in the first series. But then I thought there was a lot more of that stuff in the first series. Somebody said something.
It wasn't for the whole episode, but there were just occasional bits. Sorry. Yeah.
So, well, I was going to say somebody said something to us. I'm not going to say who or where it came from, but it was like a behind-the-scenes bit of gossip that said Ncuti Gatwa is very much about going to check his takes immediately so he can do them again if he thinks they can be better. And they said this was, and the gossipy thing about it was that they felt this was very what's it called when you're in love with yourself?
Fever?
Vain.
No, the painting, narcissistic.
Narcissist.
They were saying it was very narcissistic, but actually, maybe it's just about. But I was watching this, and I'm thinking all the time. I'm watching this, and I'm thinking, oh, that's a choice. That's a choice. That's a choice. And it was like an actor going through a series of choices rather than giving a performance. But having said that, I think he was much more toned down than he was in the first series, and I much preferred him here than I did in the 9 episodes we've had so far.
I think always
we should stop. I wish he'd stop weeping, though. I do wish he'd stop weeping. I never spotted Pertwee weeping or Hartnell weeping.
I liked it.
That's what this doctor does. That's what this doctor does. He's the
Pertwee would definitely weep if he had the ability to weep.
He had his tear ducts.
He would be in tears constantly. I mean, yeah.
Well, my 13-year-old, as we sat down to watch it, she said, "I hope he doesn't cry this time." And there he is. He did.
The one saving thing that the doctor has, I think, is if you ever think that the doctors or the actors overacting as the doctor, or he looks a bit fake, the doctor's always trying to hide something or trying to mask something, and it's the doctor, no matter which incarnation it is always sort of putting on a pretense of humanity.
Yeah. And she won't forgive me, by the way. She's a 14-year-old, not a 13-year-old.
Okay. Well, mate, it's the dating. It's the biblical dating. Maybe she was going by the original calendar,
13,
not the
14,
one that Derek had.
But on those things, on the weeping, I think here it was fully justified. I think the trouble with it has been that Russell T Davies has given us this more emotional doctor, but the thing is, he gives us the same emotions in every episode. And so we just get to see him being angry and banging a wall and then crying. And in this episode, he was angry and he banged a wall and then he cried. So it's the same ones every time. And I know it's Stephen Moffat, but you know what I mean? We had all of that. We had both of those things in every episode.
It didn't seem as egregious this time to me. I didn't
really
get.
It felt more.
I didn't go, oh, he's crying. For some reason, I've swept on with it.
But the thing is, the trouble I find with Russell T Davies's Doctor, everybody writes the Doctor as the person who commands the room. And most people write the Doctor as the person who commands the room because either A, he's the most intelligent person there, or B, he's the person who has the most presence. But Russell T Davies, I think, writes the Doctor as the person who commands the room because he's the noisiest person there. And I think what you get here for the first time, well, maybe not quite the first time, because maybe in Boom and in Rogue you don't quite get it either, but for one of the very few times with Ncuti Gatwa is he's able to give a performance as the Doctor where he's not just being asked to be the noisiest person in the room.
He's also unaccompanied by Millie Gibson.
Yeah,
so this is the first time, I think, that actually he's gone properly solo in his own story. So it could be that this gives the character, but also Ncuti Gatwa, a little bit more confidence in what he's doing and a little bit more freedom in what he's doing.
And also, I think, and this is, I don't mean this as a criticism of the people, but I think as actors, those two kind of egged each other on a bit during the recording of that first series to make performance choices that I don't think were necessarily always good ones. And I think they just caught up in the sort of enthusiasm for the parts, and they were sort of like going for it all the time. But if you just go for it all the time, eventually that becomes rather wearing. And I don't think they brought a lot of subtlety to those roles during that first series. I think this is the first time Ncuti Gatwa's been able to bring it back down and bring a bit of subtlety out.
Okay, should we score this, or do you want to talk about the next time trailer at all, or should we score it and then maybe briefly talk
afterwards
about
if you want?
Yeah. So let's do it in reverse order. JR, what do you score this one?
Well, after the first time I watched it, I think I would have gone maybe a 7 or an 8. But watching it the second time, it's definitely a 9. I don't think it's quite the top draw Stephen Moffat. But actually, watching it for the second time, when I was able to watch the spoilers unfold because I'd seen them rather than because I'd read them on a WhatsApp, it made a lot more sense and felt a lot more
Just to pin it on anyone, it was Joe. Joe.
I missed the bit where you said you hadn't watched it yet.
I mean, we also
Joe was very cross, wasn't he?
We also have a spoilers WhatsApp thread, but JR's in that as well, so it wouldn't have made any difference. And as I discovered, there's no way of muting a WhatsApp, because I was quite happily like drifting off into my Christmas Day evening sort of happiness of watching anything I wanted to, and every time my phone buzzed, I thought, oh my god, oh my god, something's gone up again. Ian, do you want to score?
I would obviously not as enthusiastic as JR, but I did mostly really enjoy it, and I did like the plot. And with the caveats we have already discussed, I would say 7.5 out of 10.
We do integers. Needs to be a whole number.
Well,
Are you 7ing it?
I'm just reveling in the out of 10. I have to do 5 fucking stars.
So go on, 7 or 8.
Do you want to round up or down?
Okay, we don't do integers. I would say 7 then.
So, Steve?
Yeah, I'm going to say 8. I think it's I loved it. I mean, but as JR said, it's not one of the very, very best.
I mean, this is the thing about these WhatsApp conversations. They're so contentious, and then we get to it. And because I'm going to give it a 9. I enjoyed it more than any other Christmas special. I've got a feeling if I rewatch it, it's not going to be up there with The Christmas Carol or The Snowmen with me, but it's not far off. So it's a 9 for me. So we're all within 2 points of each other, or 1.5 points in actual fact.
There's very few Doctor Who episodes I wouldn't give 6 and I'd love to. That's the magic of Doctor Who.
We needed one of the real iconoclasts amongst the band to come on to have a go, didn't we? Really, Joe.
Well, I mean, his antipathy towards it is so much. I'd imagine anybody listening to this is probably hearing it in the background anyway. Yeah. My phone is probably still buzzing with it.
Yeah.
Should we talk about the next time
trailer?
The hate. I can't actually remember the next time trailer very well. No. I've watched it once, but
I can't.
I can't.
I
watched it thinking that looks quite good, and a lot of that looks quite well made and fun. And then my WhatsApp started buzzing, and it was slightly negative about what might happen next season. So JR, you might be the only one who remembers this now.
No, I don't remember anything about it.
The next time trailer. Okay.
Yeah,
I did like the 1930s cartoons coming out of
the I like the cartoon.
I remember.
I think that's fantastic. I reckon that's going to be Return of Flatline, the boneless.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
But I tell you, the new Doctor Who magazine just came in the post, and so they've got an entire page dedicated to into 2025, and so clearly it's sort of like getting excited for what's to come. But they've got no more information than we have, and all they've seen is the next time trailer too. And and so, but I did read it, and I thought, oh, this is just a puff piece written by somebody who's seen the next time trailer, right? But this was the bit that really stood out to me. They are categorizing the next series as, where does it say? From what we are shown, the new series looks dynamic and fast-paced. It's a trailer, you swat. Of course, it's fast-paced.
Also, it's Doctor Who. If Doctor Who is anything other than dynamic and fast-paced, so we're anticipating the next series to be a Mike Lee sob fest set in a kitchen.
I know what I did want to mention, which is not the next time trailer, and that's the official Doctor Who podcast, which I suspect, like me, most of you will have given up on a little way into the series last year because it seemed to be aimed at a brainless 9-year-old. But I gave
it's like something the Communist Party would put together.
How dare you? How dare you?
It's very sorry, I was more thinking during the Soviet era.
How dare you? We wouldn't do that. No, but I gave it another listen at Christmas, and they seem to have learned the lessons of what went wrong last time. It seemed to be more grown up, and they had Moffat on and did a really good, interesting interview with Moffat. So. Worth a listen to.
But the BBC have got a problem with podcasts all across the board, frankly, because even their news podcasts, right? They're supposed to give you the background. So if you want the news, you'll watch the news. If you listen to the BBC's news podcasts, which I do.
That sounds an interesting one.
News podcasts, which I do, it's because you want the background. But the BBC are so strict about not, about impartiality, that they try and give you the background without making it look like anybody's to blame for anything. Yeah. And so that can kind of be problematic. And what's the point of putting out an official podcast? The point of a podcast is A, to have a conversation, and B, to be objective. But putting out an official podcast, or rather subjective, I should say, but putting out an official podcast doesn't allow you any room for subjectivity, does it? So you can't look at it from an objective distance and give it your own subjective take on an official podcast. It's kind of a pointless exercise, unless, as you say, you've got maybe somebody like Stephen Moffat where you can just have a meandering conversation with them instead.
Well, I know they had an offer a little while ago from a very experienced podcaster who does stuff for them on the DVDs and so on the Blu-rays, who went to them and offered to do an official Doctor Who podcast years ago, and got absolutely nothing back from them at all, not in the slightest bit interested. And that would have been a good one. That would have been interesting, but no.
So that was our review of the Christmas special and the War Game, and Happy New Year, everybody, for when it comes. So until next time, we have finished talking now because we're starting to talk about BBC News podcast. So until next time, I was Matt.
I was Ian.
I was JR.
And I was Steve.
And we will speak again soon.